So I was thinking about reviewing another Twilight Zone episode to celebrate Halloween, and I thought to myself, man, I don't want to get repetitive. But then again, I've made two videos about characters from King of the Hill, so fuck it. In this video, I'm going to be talking about the encounter. Now, pretty much anyone who's seen the Twilight Zone has seen Nightmare at 20,000 Feet, featuring William Shatner in the lead role. Well, what if I told you that there was an episode with George Takei as one of the lead roles? We would be talking about The Encounter, an episode that was so controversial that apparently it's the only episode of The Twilight Zone to ever get banned from syndication.
And it has a unique distinction of being the only Twilight Zone series that was aired only once. Shucks darn, I missed out on my residuals on that one.
It's always good to see George Takei with his sense of humor. And it's also good to know that even though the episode ended up being really controversial, George Takei had a real fun time doing it. So anyway, here's a spoiler warning. If you don't want this episode spoiled for you, I suggest you go watch it yourself right now. It's an episode that draws heavily on suspense and atmosphere. And it is amazing, so again, if you don't want it to be spoiled for you, go watch it. What are you waiting for? Okay, if you're still around, let's get into it. The story starts out with a man named Fenton cleaning his attic on a hot day, when suddenly he comes across a samurai sword. He is in clear shock of finding it, so he tosses it across the room. No sooner after this does George Takei's character show up. His name is Arthur, but as we find out later, his given name at birth was Taro. He has come over to Fenton's to do some gardening work for him. Fenton agrees to hire him, but first he invites him up to the attic to have a few beers. Unfortunately, however, they seem to get off on the wrong foot after a few off-key remarks by Fenton.
Truth is, my name is Taro. I changed it.
A rose is a rose. Get what I mean?
No.
And then he shows Arthur the sword. It turns out that he was in Japan in World War II and he got it off of a Japanese officer. He asks Arthur to translate what's written on the sword for him, but Arthur says that he doesn't know Japanese. So Fenton leaves the attic for a minute to go get some more beer, and Arthur picks up the sword and says out loud that he's going to kill him, but he doesn't know why. So Fenton returns to the attic, and after a few more subtle racist remarks, Arthur demands that he be treated with respect, like any working man should. We then get some more exposition about the sword. Apparently, Fenton's been trying to get rid of it for the past 20 years, because it's always given him the creeps. But the sword always manages to find its way back to him. And he reveals that when he first got it, he had his interpreter translate it for him.
Oh, sure, I know what it says. I had one of our interpreters translate it for me right after I got it. It says, "The sword will avenge me."
So naturally feeling uneasy, Arthur tries to excuse himself by saying that he needs to get back to work. This sends Fenton off on a little rant about how he's worked hard all of his life too. And of course, his little rant turns into talking about his army experiences. But unfortunately, this triggers a flashback for Fenton, causing him and Arthur to get into a fight in which Arthur nearly kills him with the sword. After some more bickering, Arthur accuses Fenton of having taken the sword off of a man that he killed in cold blood, to which Fenton reluctantly admits.
All right, so what if I did? So what if I did?
So after all that, Arthur decides that he needs to get the hell out of there. Unfortunately, the only exit leading from the attic is closed and won't open, which is strange because according to Fenton, the door doesn't even lock. With no way out, all they can do is talk. And this is where we learn about Arthur's background. He explains that he was 4 years old and living in Hawaii at the time that Pearl Harbor got attacked, and that his parents had lived there all their lives. His father had worked for the Navy and had actually helped build the docks for Pearl Harbor. After his own little flashback, he breaks down and admits that his father was actually a traitor. Apparently, his father helped signal where the kamikazes should hit. And this is what made the episode so controversial when it came out. Asian American civil rights groups came together and pretty much demanded to have the episode removed because of this specific plot point. Fenton then tries to sympathize with Arthur by offering another beer. He tells Arthur that the reason that he invited him up in the first place is because he's been lonely. Apparently, he's been fired from work, his wife left him recently, and just everything in his life has gone to shit. And he even admits that he drinks too much, which is apparently why he lost his job in the first place. But he doesn't see it like that. He sees it as a problem with immigrants coming over and taking people's jobs. When ranting about the immigrants, he names off several nationalities, one of them obviously being Japanese. He then switches back to the topic of his wife, and while speaking with his back turned, Arthur goes to pick up the sword again. When he sees this, Fenton tries to reason with Arthur, saying that just because his dad was a traitor, that's no reason to forget who he is. Fenton then says that there were snakes and liars on both sides of the war, to which Arthur replies by calling him one for killing a man in cold blood. And is it me, or does Fenton's defense for his actions sound a little bit Nazi-esque?
Well, you can't hold a man responsible for obeying orders, now can you?
Arthur just stands there motionless, holding the sword. And Fenton tells him, fine, if you're gonna kill me, just go ahead and kill me already. Because according to Fenton, he's afraid of living. They then get into their final fight, in which Fenton is actually able to get the sword away from Arthur. However, Arthur still manages to kill him with it. After Fenton dies, Arthur picks up the sword, yells "Bonsai," and jumps out the window to his death. And then the door leading out of the attic magically opens by itself, and we get the closing narration, which I'm actually going to leave out as a further incentive for you to actually go watch this yourself. Okay, so you might be wondering why I chose this episode for the Halloween season. Because, you know, it's got a great suspenseful atmosphere, but it's not really a scary episode. I guess let me explain it like this. The living doll made me afraid of dolls, or I should say more afraid than I already was. But this episode touches on a plethora of horrors that many people still face in their daily lives. I'm talking about the horrors of war, the horror of PTSD, the horrors of prejudice and racism, and of course the horrors of remorse and guilt, just to name a few. What makes this episode truly great is the atmosphere and the writing. Like I said earlier, social commentary was one of the things that the Twilight Zone was best at, and there's really no other episode that exemplifies that more than The Encounter. And if you disagree with me on that, then I respect that you have another opinion. Anyway, thanks for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Bye.